topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a core alignment coach, an emotional wisdom training specialist, and a diversity educator. And I'm honored and grateful to be able to use this platform to host conversations weekly on issues that are critical to all of us, about solutions, people who have ideas, people who are working hard to do such things as prevent violence, to recognize patterns of violence, who figured out ways or find organizations to develop programs that help prevent it and working towards ending it. Before I introduce my guest today, I wanted to just point out my website has some programs, classes that I teach to individuals and groups. And the website is called knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. And some of it is related to, actually, most of it's focused on how creating more inclusive communities and belonging, which often starts with first we have to recognize where we're at in our process of consciously or unconsciously stepping on other people, which sadly is the norm in much of our cultural patterns. Today, I have an amazing guest who has been working in the field of violence prevention in one form or another for 30 years. Heidi Randall is here with us today. She is the executive director of an organization called Maine, as in the state of Maine, M-A-I-N-E, Maine Boys to Men. And I am so excited because in times of despair, when there's so much bad news about shootings and actual indoctrination of people into white supremacy, and in really a short period of time of converting people who could have never caused such harm into people who kill people based on the color of their skin or some other completely unfounded reason, not that it's ever founded. So I will say more about Heidi once she comes on. Heidi, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Bahia. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, and when we scheduled this, it was before the last couple of horrific things that I'm aware of, and of course, so much violence. But I know we will end on a more encouraging note because you're here, and the work you do is what gives me hope. But I wanted to let folks know that you have worked in family violence and sexual assault and youth engagement programs, not only in Maine, but also Vermont and also New Zealand, which will be very interesting to hear about. And you developed a youth engagement program that spanned all across the state of Maine and involved a diversity of communities across diversity. So there's so much I want to hear about from you. So it would be nice. Why don't I let you say the mission of Boys to Men, Maine Boys to Men?
Yeah, thank you, Bahia. I'd love to share that I love our mission. So we are the only program in the state of Maine or organization, and whose primary focus is to end all forms of male violence and self-harm. So male violence against others and male violence against self, while advancing gender equity. So that is our mission. And, to our knowledge, we are the only organization that is solely focused on ending all forms of male violence. in the state of Maine.
And how do you do it?
Yeah. So we do this. We have 3 pillars in our organization that we are the foundation of all of our programming, which is the pillars of empathy, connection, and belonging. So we have a suite, what we call a suite of curriculums. We start with the healthy development of boys. So we work with entire grades of middle school boys. For example, we'll go in and work with an entire 7th grade or an entire 8th grade, and we break those boys up into small groups, and then we do some really deep connecting, empathy building work with them, specifically around ending male violence and self-harm. And we'll go in and work with the school for as many weeks as it takes to work with every single male identified student in that class. So we start with the middle school boys. Then we work with high school students. And when we work with high school students, we work with students of all genders. Again, smaller, a little bit larger groups, but still a small group of 40 students at a time. And in high school, we get a total of 12 hours with those students as a small group. We shifted a little bit in high school to work across all genders, because we think that at that stage and age of development, it's really important for young people to learn how to partner with each other in terms of ending male violence and self-harm and advancing gender equity. And we believe that developmentally at that stage, they're more able to have those conversations with each other and alongside each other. And then we shift, that's sort of, those are our youth serving programs. Alongside, we also serve youth at risk and youth who are in risk in very specific programs. For example, we might work with Long Creek, which is a juvenile detention facility here in Maine. We may work with a program called Learning Works, which is an alternative education program here in Maine. We may work with a program called Mainstay, which is sort of like a sober house here in Maine for youth. So there are a lot of different ways that we serve in risk and at-risk youth as well. So those are kind of our youth serving programs. And then we shift over to our youth serving adult programs. So we consider ourselves a youth serving organization. So we work directly with youth, and then we work directly with adults who serve youth. So that could be parents, specifically fathers. It could be first-time fathers, people are expecting their first child. It could be educators. We have a whole educator and coaches, athletic coaches program. It could be anyone who serves youth, maybe in an after-school program, at sort of any youth serving organization we work with, those adults about how they can be working with youth themselves to shift male violence, self-harm, and advance gender equity. And then we have this amazing thing that we've started we started piloting it and researching it probably 6 years ago. And now we're really in the implementation phase, which is something we call our Training Institute. So we are a very small team here at Maine Boys to Men, and with our small team, we can reach, on a good year, we can reach maybe 3,000 to 4,000 youth a year. But what we really know is that we need to be reaching hundreds of thousands of youth a year. If we're going to be shifting, this sort of tide, we need to be reaching a critical mass of youth. So what we've decided to do is to put our curriculum in the hands of others and train other people to take our programs out into their own communities, whether that is in Greater Portland, whether that's across the state of Maine, or whether that's in other parts of the country. So we're actually training people and giving them the curriculum and then supporting them as they bring this work out into their own communities. So that's just like a quick snapshot about who we are and what we do.
Fantastic. How many staff do you have right now?
We are a staff of 6.
Wow.
Yeah, and we have a few interns and volunteers and contractors, but primarily we're very small, but we're very efficient and impactful, I like to say.
It sure sounds like 6 people reaching over 3,000 students in 1 year. That's very impressive. And 6 years of testing this project that you're now able to implement.
Mhm.
And are a lot of the adults that are involved in supporting youth volunteers?
Um, it's a real mixed. You mean in terms of people who come through our training institute?
Yeah, like how the people who support the programs that you were mentioning, is that all 6 paid staff manage all those, or do you have,
Oh,
community volunteers who come in and help?
yeah, I would say we have on any given year, we have maybe 3 or 4 either MSW level interns or we have a youth advisory council, and a lot of the students who come through our program will join the youth advisory council, and then they'll go off to college or they'll come home for the summer and they'll intern for us. They'll want to kind of become a part of our team. And so we often
Mm,
get a lot of sort of graduates from our programming who want to be a part of our organization for a summer or for an internship through college as well. Yeah.
well, I'm really impressed that, you will take as many weeks as it takes to work. When you were talking about the middle school age group, how difficult is it to access schools, and how difficult is it to work with school systems who feel like they have no time, feel like they have no resources, feel like they can't do one more thing? How do you do that?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I wish I had a very simple answer for you. But what we have done is show up repeatedly in a supportive role for
Mm,
schools in our community year after year after year. And we've met them where they're at. For
mm,
example, when we first started, going into schools and offering our programming, it's fair to say we weren't in super high demand, and schools weren't willing necessarily to pay us for our work. And so we really had to build relationships. We had to offer our programming for free. For many years, our program was grant funded, and we would just, because of the grant funding, we were able to offer it to free. And then
mm,
slowly over time, we built an incredibly reliable brand, and our community really came to value us and to see the importance of our work. Then there was sort of like a shift happening, where the more schools we were in, then the word was spreading, and then the principals were calling, and the principal might
mm,
in one school move to another school, right? Get promoted or shift to a different school community, and then they would want to bring us along with them to that community as well. Um, and just prior to the pandemic, we I think we had served in the in a 5-year time period, we had increased our programming 700%, which is
wow,
like really unbelievable over like the whole 12 years prior. And so we were sort of really being valued in the communities that we served in the schools. And they were just, once they were in the habit of having us every year, it's like they didn't want to go a year without having us, that
mm,
they really felt the change in the school culture. And it was a really supportive, it helped kind of support all of the other work that they were doing in education, was to have their students have this common foundation of empathy, connection, belonging, and respect, kind of everyone getting that same information. Then, when the pandemic happened, obviously, schools were under a tremendous amount and still are of
mhm,
stress. And as an organization, we basically just said, you tell us what you need, and we are here for you.
mm,
And so, for example, many schools asked us to just do online stuff with like their whole school. We really let the schools kind of define how we could support them through that time period, and we didn't put any pressure in any way on schools in terms of programming. And then something amazing sort of happened, I would say, coming out in August or September of this year of the last academic year, 2021, we saw an unprecedented, demand for our programming more than any year prior. For example, just in the time period of January through April, we worked with 1,000 students, which is just like a crazy amount in a very short amount of time. And what we're finding right now is that young people coming out of the pandemic, having spent so much time sort of isolated from each other and on screens and, just all of the stress and tension that everyone has been under over the last few years, that when the students were coming back to school, that the schools were experiencing, a lot of behavioral issues, a lot of social problems between students. It was as though students had kind of forgotten about how to be together in community and were really struggling with their relationships to each other and their relationships to the teachers. And a lot of sort of events were occurring, and the teachers were very, very concerned, specifically about male behavior that they were seeing on sports teams and hallways and classes. And so we've been getting just this crazy amount of demand for our programming. And we have tried to say yes to everybody who asked and really make it happen, because one of our core values as an organization is to be responsive to our community and support our schools any way we can.
Well, it really sounds like a responsive approach. And I loved when you said we just you showed up repeatedly and supportively. And it sounds like really good relationship building with schools, and offered the program for free until you couldn't. And then, wow, look what's happened. And relatively, and with the pandemic in the middle, relatively a very few short number of years.
One other thing that I forgot to mention, Bahia, is that we got some funding from the Department of Justice for over a 3-year period. And one of the programs they funded was an educators and coaches training. And again, we were able to offer that for free. And what that was a shorter training. It could be up to a day long, or it could be up to 2 hours. Kind of, again, we needed to be flexible with schools. And what we did there was we just put ourselves in front of as many educators and coaches as we possibly could. And they so valued and appreciated the training that we were offering that became almost a feeder program for them, inviting us into their schools if we hadn't been in their schools, because they just learned to trust us, and they learned to know more about the messages and what we were bringing to the students, because they were experiencing the program themselves and they could see the value in it. And so that's something I would recommend too, is to create some sort of a training that allows the adults who will be inviting you to those schools to experience what it is that you'll be doing with the students, as a way of a bridge into the school, or a way of building trust with those adults.
That is so important. We know what happens when the leaders don't know the vocabulary that the younger people are learning, or the so-called subordinate people, whether if it's a workplace. That's really a critical piece.
The other piece is, I think that so much of our core content focuses on, let's see, how would I say it? It focuses on core problems of being human. So when you allow for the adults to experience, some of the activities which, really center people in empathy and connection and belonging to each other, they're having their own experience about what it was like, to grow up with their own sort of gendered experience, let's say, and they're having an opportunity to reflect on some of the things that didn't go so well for them as a young person in terms of gender equity or pressures to perform gender or masculinity in a way that's harmful to themselves and others. And, that's the biggest selling tool, is that no one has ever asked them to reflect or been empathetic or sympathetic to their experiences. And to be the first people to have those conversations, they realize how valuable they are through their own processing. And then they sort of want that for everyone in their school.
Sounds incredibly validating. And if for people listening on the radio, I just want to say the website address out loud, and it's just www.mainboystomen.com, and it's TO, the word two. And we'll mention that again towards the end. Well, this is phenomenal. And I'm just curious, how many hours would you say, like, I know you have different programs and they probably vary in amount of time, but is there a way you can tell us like a average number of hours, like a 7th grade class or an 8th grade class would be meeting with you all and being able to go to these places and, feeling obviously emotionally safe with you all and exploring things they probably have never been asked to explore before or supported in exploring before? Like how much time do they have with you? Yeah.
So to say we've been thoughtful about our curriculum content is an understatement. We have tried, we have tested and tried and piloted, and we've gotten it like right down because we know school time is valuable. Like the school schedules are down to a minute, a minute. Well, we're going to be working with the kids from 7:43 until 8:42. It's very specific. So for our middle school boys, those who are identified as male students, we come in once a week for an hour, a 60-minute workshop for 4 weeks in a row. And the groups, we like to keep the size of the groups between 12 and 20. 20 would be the highest we would go for there to be trust that's sort of built. And we're very careful about what we do first and what we do next, and then what we do the third time. And then we're spending a lot of time building connection between the facilitators and the students, building trust in the room, support and empathy for each other, establishing respect, ground rules, all that kind of stuff. And then we sort of slowly start building up into, content. It starts out really being very playful and very fun. All of our curriculums are based out of a social emotional learning framework. So students are up, they're moving around the room. There isn't like a PowerPoint or anything like that. It's just one activity which deepens and leans into the next, and then deepens and leans into the next. And it's sort of like this whole sort of building process. We're also not ever directly teaching to students. We're creating opportunities for them to have dialogue with each other about the topics that they're most interested in. So middle school age, they're really interested in what their peers think about these topics. They're interested in relationships. They're interested in intimate relationships. They're just beginning to see some of their friends engage or older siblings engage in relationships, and they're curious. They want to be successful at those. And so it's actually a really interesting time to come in and sort of talk about those kind of things. Like, here are the keys, these are the keys to getting along well with your peers, to getting along well with the people you're interested in developing deeper relationships with. And, everything from we have scenarios that we talk through, and we have them sort of guess the next step that are all take place like at a middle school dance, that young boys are really interested. And it's interesting because I think there is a message we send young boys is like, they don't care about those things, but in fact, they care deeply about those things. And they want a sort of like how-to guide to navigate those situations that they almost always feel unprepared for or unequipped to kind of navigate, whether it's friendships or the beginning of more intimate, vulnerable relationships.
Yeah, it's so amazing how we don't have how-to guides. The absence of them is showing up in all kinds of ways.
Mhm.
Well, this might be a good time for people who are viewing the show to look at the pictures. Roxy, do you mind putting up Heidi's? There's 5 or 6 pictures from there. Can you describe them, Heidi?
Yeah, so this is a picture of one of our high school trainings. And this is sort of a team. This is one of our sort of trusting activities where we're talking about communication and how to work together and what's needed for healthy communication. And so we've given them a difficult task, and they have to kind of work through it, and then we kind of break it down. So let me tell you a little bit about this. Is just an example of how our programming is very active. There isn't a lot of sitting around. There's just moving from one, theme that builds on another into the next. And it's very fast paced and fast moving, and it really keeps the attention of the group. But I would like to say that our high school curriculum is much different than our middle school. We actually spend 12 hours. We have 12 hours of content that we move students through. So it's a full 2 days of high school. So it's from bell to bell. We usually like to have it not be 2 days in a row because it's so much content that we want them to have some time to process what they've learned. So it can be 1 or 2 days in between before we have the second day. And we work specifically with 40 groups of students of all different genders, all different grade levels, and across all different sort of social groups. We work with teachers to intentionally choose students to be a part of that training, they may go into the room and not know anyone else in the room, because we want them to pull from all of the different kind of spheres of influence around the school. So maybe students who are into theater, or students who are into sports, or students who aren't into either of those. So it's a real mix, because they then take that information and they bring that out into their peer groups. If the school's really large, like a school that has 1,000 students, we might do 3 of these trainings. So we're kind of working with 120 students a year from each of those schools to kind of reach a critical mass of students.
And I'm sure, given the thoughtfulness and thoroughness of your curriculums, you have ways to accommodate for people with different physical abilities, because even that one picture looked like a very physical activity. And you must have alternative options for students in wheelchairs or who are not that mobile.
Yep. So we have, we've done all kinds of different things over the years. And we have had lots of students of different abilities participate in the training, some who have ed tech help, some who have difficulty hearing or speaking. And we just kind of individualize that per training as needed. We get that information ahead of time. Even COVID has created a new way of thinking through our curriculum. We don't do as much physical contact with each other, so we've had to adapt a lot of our activities or change them, because not everybody is comfortable with, being closer than 6 feet apart right now. So we've had to kind of pivot and navigate, but we found it doesn't really. We still are getting sort of the effect that we need from our programming, for sure.
No doubt. There's another photo.
Yeah, this is a great activity. It's called Stop Lines. So in this activity, we are teaching students about boundaries and communication. And so this is adapted from a program in the state of Maine called Prevention Action Change. And in this activity, students are actually learning how to physically set boundaries. So if they're in a situation where something doesn't feel right to them, whether they're seeing something or someone is approaching them, or there's just there's something happening around them that they're not comfortable with, we're actually teaching them to not passively live into that experience, but instead to sort of actively live into that experience by using either their eyes to communicate a message, their voice to communicate a message, or their physical arms to communicate a message to either the people in the situation or someone coming towards them in a way that de-escalates the situation. So that, because we believe that it's really important for people to physically practice those situations if they're going to pull from those experiences in a time when it's needed. If the brain has had the opportunity to practice those scenarios prior to the time when you need them the most, you're going to be able to activate that from your brain and have that be able to enter into that experience. The other thing, after we have practiced, we also actually have the high school students practice breaking up with each other as though they were in a relationship. And again, no one ever teaches a young person how to gracefully and kindly, yet firmly establish a boundary in a relationship they no longer want to be a part of. Like, nobody ever teaches young people this. And so instead, we see a lot of harmful behavior around breaking up and people wanting to break up, going on for months and months and months, or people not accepting a breakup, or somebody threatening to kill themselves if you break up with them, or all these unhealthy behaviors in these first initial relationships. And it's really fun, and they have a blast. And, all the wheels are turning of like, oh, I can do this. Like, I can practice. This is a skill. It doesn't just happen automatically, right? We have to support our young people and give them the space to like practice with each other of like, this is what it feels like. It's not, this is what it sounds like. This is how I do this, for sure.
Oh my gosh, there's so much. Wow. Even referring back to the kind of the brain muscle memory of practicing boundary and using your body, your voice, or I flash back to a time when myself and a couple other young women were in a very crowded situation and surrounded by many men. We were definitely a minority, and gender-wise, and yeah. Anyway, I remember like being completely able to use my elbows and my body and not be stopped and push and just like, and I won't go into how I learned that. But then I saw my two girlfriends were not able to do that. And I remember being astounded that they couldn't think of it. They couldn't. And I was literally saying, imitate me, do this. But it was so hard. It was really, really hard for them to like suddenly take that on, something they'd never heard of before or didn't know it was an option before. Here's another photo. Go ahead. Thank you for the next photo.
Yeah, so this was at a boys' summer camp in Maine, where we were brought in to work with sort of the counselors in training and all of the counseling staff. So that one, we could train them, and then two, that they could then bring some of these activities to their cabins or to their group activities during the summer. And this is, again, is sort of like the stop line activity. And in this activity, we were actually working with them on how to stand up, or how to connect with a friend who is using language that is harmful, like microaggression kind of language that's harmful. For example, using, a friend comes up to you and says, I know this so-and-so's your friend, but he's such a, you can fill in the blank, right? Some sort of like inappropriate, harmful language that is so normalized in our culture. And like, as men, like what we are told about is that they're sort of taught within the male youth culture to not that they're supportive of that language, but they passively sort of allow it, right? So they don't take a stand against it, but they don't jump into to support the behavior, but they just kind of passively experience it, right? Yet they're really against it inside themselves. And so, and that's that next step of how do we engage boys and men who aren't aligned with the behavior, but are sort of passively experiencing it and not sort of taking that next step of activating against it. And so
Mhm.
that is really what we were teaching them is sort of like, in order to shift this culture of harm, it just takes it passively standing by when this is happening isn't going to cut it. We have to like activate as boys and men and really shift by connecting with the person who's doing the behavior in a way that's not shaming and blaming, but just is sort of like, hey, like, we don't talk like that here. Or when I observe you using that language, it makes me feel, like bad and not wanting to be around that, or that it's going to hurt somebody else's feelings, or I care about these people and I don't want to be a part of that. So it's not shaming or blaming, it's just saying what they observe. And so they're actually practicing intervening in that way. And again, nobody is teaching boys and men about how to activate out of that passivity. And in fact, they're often getting the opposite message, which is the bro code, or the, if you don't sort of like, if you stand up against any of this, then you will be cast out and you will become the target of aggression and violence and language and harassment as well.
So true.
Mm.
Isn't it amazing that, like, I don't want to oversimplify it. I know it's a lot of work, but it also, the thought is coming to me like, isn't that all it takes? Is that all it takes? Attention, nurturing, acceptance.
Empathy, connection, and belonging. So what I've seen and what my team has seen is that every person, regardless of gender, within themselves, really wants to be aligned with the higher humanity within themselves, right? And flat out, we don't give them permission or space to be, right? From a very young age, doesn't matter which gender, we're putting on to young people, whatever their gender identity is, we're putting onto them, you need to look like this, you need to act like this, you need to be successful in this way within your, gender identity, you need to be athletic, you need to be strong, you need to have a certain body type, you need to be passive, you need to be polite, and nobody is just sort of saying like, you get to be a human being and you get to act on your inner, the piece within you that wants to feel connected and belong to the things that feel good around you. And when we give them permission in a way to just take off all of these messages and these expectations that have been just kind of piled on them, there's such a relief in the room. And you get the most amazing thing to me is you get the feeling like in these groups of, 12 middle school boys, that literally no one has ever told them that before. That it's okay to just literally be who you are without no need to perform masculinity to be accepted, or no need to be, in order to be an athlete, or to be successful, you have to be an athlete. If you're not an athlete, you don't have any value. Or if you're not aggressive and control, you don't have any value or status in the middle school or any of that. Like, just like, you get to just be, and that is enough. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It is. It's. Do you find that it very similar or exactly the same thing, but different, and internalizing different messages around race or sexual orientation? Just this is the way you're supposed to be. This is the way you're supposed to act. You act superior. You act inferior. You take this role. You take that role. Is that the same process of conditioning, and then internalizing those messages when we don't have enough to contrast some of those cultural patterns?
Absolutely. So we talk about, we introduce something called the gender boxes, and we do it within, we don't believe in gender as a binary at all. We don't promote that as an idea in any way. And what we do is to highlight sort of the pressures that young people feel to conform to the binary. We have this discussion about, we draw a box, we call it the man box, and we draw another box and call it the woman box. And we talk about like, what is the messaging about you have to fit into this one or you have to fit into that one? And we talk about, what does it mean in our culture? What are the messages that we get in terms of being a man or being a woman? And you have to have a certain body type, and you have to be brave, and you can't cry, and all the things, right? And then we talk about like, well, how does this get like enforced? Like, what happens if you try to step out of one of these boxes?
Yeah.
And what happens is language, right? You get called all kinds of things. So if maybe you identify as male, but you aren't necessarily fitting those stereotypes of common messaging that young boys get about what it means to be a male. Maybe you paint your fingernails, or maybe you are in the band instead of on the football team, or I'm using these sweeping generalizations here, but just to prove the point.
Sure.
And you start being called, language, I'm not sure how appropriate it is to use the language on this show, but you start being called, language that is harmful, that questions your masculinity, that questions your sexual identity, that basically others you. Like you have less value because you don't fit this narrow definition of masculinity. So therefore you are other. And the moment that we use language to other people, then we shift something in our brain shifts, and it gives somebody a belief that if you're other, then you are less than.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment somebody has a belief that someone is less than them or othered or has less value, then something changes in that, in terms of status, right? If somebody is less than, then I can have power over, right? And then I can cross boundaries. I can, elicit harm. I have sort of authority over. And that language really sets up the system for policing, gender, but it also sets up the system for policing race, sexual identity, all of the isms, right? And it's always this hierarchy. And so when we do those gender boxes, it creates the platform for saying, like, how does this relate to race? How does this relate to different forms of sexual, preference or identity? Like, how does this keep playing out in all of the ability, all of that? Like, how does this same system apply to all of these other places? And the students can really see what's happening there. And really the centered norm for the stereotypes is people who are white, people who are male, people who are heterosexual. They have the power and the status in our culture. And those are the people who are most often othering other people. So that's how we kind of get into that topic.
That's how you connect all the different forms of violence and how they are perpetuated. And then the second people are objectified and less valued, then we can start justifying violence with that kind of miniature brain, the non-thinking conditioning. Wow. Well, we only have a couple of minutes left.
You're kidding. I feel like we just started.
No, and I think there's a couple more photos. And could we just quickly run through those, and then we'll just have to wrap up?
Of course. Yeah, I can't believe it's already time. Yep. So this is one of our high school trainings. This is something we call our promposal scenario. So we actually read a short story, and we go piece by piece, and the students move across the room depending on how they feel about what's happening in the scenario. And in this training, actually, it was so funny because we were running out of time, so we didn't get to finish it. And we didn't get to finish the story, and we had to continue it to the next day. And the students were like, "You can't leave us hanging." They were so invested in the story and wanting to know what was going to happen. Yeah, this is actually one of the most favorite activities. And again, prom is, it's a very stressful event at most schools, but it really gave the students an opportunity to unpack all those subtle things. And this is a group of people who participated in our first pilot training institute. People came from New York, they came from Canada, they came from New Hampshire, they came from across Maine, Massachusetts, and we even had a woman come from a First Nations community up in Canada to be the first people to receive our curriculum and be trained on it.
Fantastic. Gosh, Heidi, thank you so much for all this information. Can you say out loud both the website and the inquiry, the email, if someone wants to email you?
Sure. Yeah. So we are Maine Boys to Men. So www.maineboystomen.com. And on our website, there is an inquiry form. If you have any questions about anything, you can just fill that out and send it out. And you can also reach me directly at Heidi@maineboystomen.com. Thank you so much for having me, Bahia, and for your amazing work that you're doing.
We just barely started talking. I hope folks check out the website, and I want to support this program spreading across the country and the world. It's fantastic work. I really appreciate it. So thank you, Heidi. And thank you, Roxy, our engineer, and Dean, our producer. And thank you to all the listeners and viewers. We so appreciate your paying attention to these critical issues that impact all of us. And thanks for the hope and not giving up hope. We'll see you next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time at WF4CY.com or Talk4TV. Maybe I'll have
Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech